servlet container, or which is also called web container, servlet access model, life cycle of the servlet, what is do get and do post methods. Okay, how to configure servlet and servlet mapping, passing parameters to the servlet configuration, servlet context, and request dispatcher, which is forward, include, send, redirect. Am I audible? I am audible to everyone, right? Some of them are still saying that I am not audible. Is my voice breaking? I am audible, right? Some of them are still saying that I am not audible. Is my voice breaking? See, for those for whom my voice is breaking, please check with your internet connections. Okay, for everyone it is fine. So for most of you, my voice is fine and I am audible. Okay, so please check your internet connections. Okay, please don't interrupt in between, like audio issues and everything. If everyone faces the same issue, then that is the problem from my end. But right now I am audible to everyone. Okay. So this is our model view controller. So what is model view controller? It is nothing but design pattern. Okay, model view controller is nothing but a design pattern which is helpful or which is used to organize the structure of web applications, right? So here in model what happens? Database related operations to be performed, like Derby. Okay, like Derby database or MySQL database. So it will represent the application's data and business logic. So this model is responsible for retrieving, processing, and storing data while typically interacting with the database or the other data sources. Okay. Now what is the use of this view? So view is responsible for presenting the data from the model to the user. Right? In web applications, this is typically by HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. Nothing but like front end part. View means the front end part which user is able to see, right? Or any templating language that displays the user interface. The view listens to the controller and updates the UI based on the model's data. Okay, now what do we mean by controller? Controller acts as an intermediate between the model and the view. Okay. It handles user inputs often by interacting with model and then decides view to display. Okay, the controller updates the view whenever the model's data changes. So now we will see how it works. So first of all, what is happening? User is requesting something from view. Okay, user is trying to request some data from view. Now what is view is doing? View is trying to access the data from the controller. Now controller is asking the data to the model. Now whichever the data is provided by the model, where our data is present, actually it is present inside the model, right? So after getting the data, required data from the model, the controller tells the view that this is the particular data that this is the operation you need to perform, or this is the UI you need to display. So now the data received from the controller is sent back to the user as a response. Okay. So this is the working of MVC, which is model view controller. So to summarize, what is the responsibility of model? Fetching the data from the database, processing the data, and updating the database. Okay. What is the use of view? Yes, front end part. To display the data to the user, providing a user interface for interacting with the application, and rendering the data provided by the model. And what is the use of controller? Handling the user input requested by the user. For example, URL requests, submissions, and invoking business logic by calling methods on the model. This is the working of or responsibility of controller, right? Now we will see what is servlet. What is servlet? Sun introduced Java servlet. What is Sun? Company name which mentioned which introduced us Java earlier in 90s, right? Now who owns Java? Oracle, right? So Sun introduced Java servlet, which is a small program written in Java and executed by the server. Okay. This specialized module I think where were we here? So servlet is a compiled Java class that are executed and maintained by a Java servlet container. Now later in next slide we will see what do we mean by container. Okay. Servlet technology allows us to develop Java applications that generate web content. So previously what we were doing, we were just working on the standalone applications in our Eclipse IDE, right? But now we will see how to run the Java applications or create the Java applications on web or on the servers. Okay. Servlet have access to the entire family of Java APIs, including the JDBC API to access the enterprise databases, right? Now, what does the web server do? A web server uses a separate module to load and run servlets. This specialized module, which is dedicated to servlet management, is called servlet container or servlet engine. Okay. Now, what is servlet container? The container loads, initializes, and executes servlets as required. It manages the servlet lifecycle, which includes loading the servlet, instantiating the servlet, and calling its init method, service method to handle requests, and finally call the destroy method when the servlet is taken out of the service, right? So the servlet container implements lifecycle methods, manages security, etc. So today servlets are popular choice for building interactive web applications. third-party servlet containers are available for Apache Web Server, Microsoft, and others. So this is the pictorial view of servlet access model. Okay. Now here is the client or the user, we can say, is sending the HTTP request to the server. Okay. Now after receiving the HTTP request at the server, what server is trying to do? Server is trying to invoke the servlet. Okay, web server is trying to invoke the servlet from the servlet container. Okay, so based on the request URL, HTTP URL, it will invoke the servlet from the servlet container. Then again the servlet will go to some other services based on the request type, gather the request and respond back to the servlet being invoked, and servlet again gives the response back to the web server. Then web server converts the response into the client readable form and returns back to the client. So whatever the client requested has been processed or viewed by the web server. Then web server asks the servlet, invokes the servlet from the servlet container. And what servlet container does? Tries to access the other services or the requested information from other services. And then responds back to the servlet, then gives the same response to the web server. Then web server is processing the data which is received from the servlet and sending it back to the client in a client readable, in the form of client readable response. Got it? Now how the entire process which I explained will work. So how these HTTP requests are sent? When a user clicks on a hyperlink displayed in an HTML page, a user fills out a form in an HTML page and submit it. Okay. So whenever a user click on an HTML page and empty form is there, like what is your name, employee ID, address, like that. And as the user fills and enters the submit button, a user enters into URL's browser address field and press enter. Okay. So this is servlet lifecycle. So from the web server, whatever the request is received from the client to the web server, the web server is pointing towards the servlet container. Now what is the working of servlet container? It will invoke one of the servlet from the servlet container and it will invoke the init, service and destroy methods from the servlet. Okay. What do you mean by thread? Yes. In simple words, we can say a lightweight process. Now, what is happening here? We can see here from the web server, we have three arrows, right? Pointing towards the servlet container. It means we need to perform three different tasks or three different tasks simultaneously. That is why we are using threads. Why threads are used? Because we using threads we can run multiple tasks concurrently with other threads within the same process, right? So that is why thread A, thread B, and thread C are there. Okay. Now let's see what are these init, service, and destroy methods. So now what is init method? This method is called by servlet container to indicate to the servlet that it must be initialized by itself and get ready for the service. The container passes an object of type servlet config as parameter. So this init method will be invoked by servlet container, right? Where our servlets are present inside our servlet container. So this method is called by the servlet container to indicate to the servlet that it must initialize by itself and get ready for the service. Now, whenever the init method is invoked, what is the next step? It means it should provide the service method, right? And the container passes an object type of what will be the parameter? Servlet config as the parameter. Now what does this service method do? Service method, this method is called by the servlet container for each request from the client to allow the servlet to respond to the request, right? Now if we go back to the previous diagram, you can see here for each request from the web server, how many requests are there? Three, right? 1, 2, and 3. And for all three requests, three separate threads are created. And all three separate threads are pointing towards which method? Service method. Since the init method is already invoked. And init method asks the servlet to provide the service, right? Here we can see this method is service method is called by the servlet container for each request from the client to allow the server. Now listen to this line carefully, right? Or observe this line carefully. From the client to allow the servlet to respond to the request, right? This method is called by the servlet container for each request from the client to allow the servlet to respond to the request. So how many requests were requested from the web server? 3, right? So for all 3, this service should respond, right? Am I right? Okay. So let's move. Now, what is the use of destroy? Yes, in simple terms, we can say terminate or clean itself or destroy whatever the task that we performed previously, right? So this method is called by the servlet container to indicate to the servlet that it must clean up itself or release any acquired resources and get ready to go out of service. Now, what do you mean by out of service? In simple terms, we can say that the service has provided successfully whichever the required or requested service has provided successfully. Now I am cleaning myself. Who is saying this? Servlet is saying this, right? From the servlet container. Clear, everyone? In simple words, I have tried to explain. So to summarize, what is the use of init method? To indicate that the servlet has initialized by itself and get ready for the service. Now what is the use of service method? To process the request, right? To process the request or to provide the response to the request requested from the servlet container or from the web browser, web server. And what is the use of destroy method? To clean up itself or to come out of the service. Now, how will we create a simple login page using servlet? So this, in which language these all these things are written? HTML, right? So everyone is familiar with HTML. In simple terms, we can say that to collect the user data, right? To collect the user data, that is why we are using form tag. So this is form tag where name is equals to, name of the form is login form, method equals to post. So what is this name, method, action? What do you mean by these terms? What do we call them? Attribute? Yes. So these are the attributes of this form tag. Okay. What is the use of input tag? Input tag is used to take the user input. Right. So here input type equals to text, where and name equals to user ID. So today we will see only theoretical part, okay? Because my Eclipse is not working properly today, giving some issues. With the server configuration, okay? So here input type equals to text and name equals to user ID, right? Now what is the meaning of this line and this line? Here I am asking the user to put the user ID, and in this we are asking the user to enter the password, right? Now what is the difference between these two? If I am writing here type equals to password, will it be masked? Yes, password will be hidden. Okay. And what is the use of this line? Input type equals to submit, name equals to login button, value equals to login. What is the meaning of value? Value attribute here. So will it have text as value or submit button or submit? What will be the UI for this? Okay, some of you are saying login, some of you are saying submit. So this is your homework. Okay, you need to rectify and tell me what is the correct answer. Now we will see what is get and post method. What is get? Get exposes the data through browser's URL, while post is most secured way for posting the data. And get has browser restrictions for character size of query string to be only 255 characters, whereas post has no size restrictions as such. Yes, in simple terms, post is used to encrypt. So this is the example for get and post. Yeah, HTML is must. CSS, in order to work with JSP, you need to be very much familiar with HTML. CSS is not that much requirement, but it is recommended. At least you should know the basics. Okay. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, can you see this example? What will happen here if I use get? Yes, it is less secured, because since I am posting the credit card details, right? So it should be more secured. But here, if I am trying to use the get method, then if I am trying to use the get, then it is not that much secured, right? Yes, it will show the data. Yes, it will expose the content present in the URL. Now we will see the URL. So this is the URL for get request. Okay, so for the post, so you tell me what is the main difference between get and post? Which is more encrypted, which is more secured? Post, right? So in this example, which one will you use? Okay. So now clear with the difference between get and post, everyone? To summarize again, get exposes the data through browser's URL, whereas post is more secured way for posting the data, right? In get, browser requires the character size of query to be 255 characters only. And when it comes to the post request, no size restrictions are there. Okay, clear everyone? So these are the servlet interface. So we have already gone through this servlet interface. In our servlet interface, what are the methods that we have? Init method, get servlet config, service, get servlet info, and destroy. Okay, let me do it on full screen mode. Okay. In generic servlet, what is generic servlet? So what can you see or what can you observe in this diagram? Here the major difference is you can see servlet is the interface, right? And generic extends, and generic is the class, Java class, right? Generic servlet. And HTTP servlet is the Java class implemented from generic servlet class. Okay. So here what I am trying to tell you that which class is implemented from which interface. So generic servlet class is implemented from the servlet interface, and HTTP servlet is implemented from the generic servlet. And these are the types of methods or the methods that are present inside the classes. So all these methods we cannot cover at one go, right? Since you also know how much time we are getting to cover session and how many topics are there. So this is generic servlet class, which is implemented from the servlet interface and servlet config interface. Okay. See, don't worry about the slides. I will try to share it if possible, but as of now, let's focus on there. Okay. What is annotation? Can anyone tell me? Yes. To add extra code. Okay. Based on the single annotation, or we can say it is we can use an annotation to define a servlet, mapping it to a specific URL pattern. Now here you can see here web @web annotations are always defined by @ right, @web servlet. Here we can see in that particular code we have some predefined code mentioned for that particular annotation. Like whenever I am trying write web init param, then I can get this or reuse this code, right? So as of now, let's see it here only. This is the sample servlet. So this hello world servlet is our class name, extends HTTP servlet. Now from where I am extending the HTTP servlet? This is present in which package? Java x.servlet.star package. So if I am writing dot star, it will include all the classes present in the servlet package. Okay. And dot servlet dot http dot star means, so from where this http servlet class is extended, or where it is present in which package? Yes, in servlet dot http. Now what we are doing here? What is the public void service means? In this public void service method, what we are saying, we are mentioning the servlet request. We are creating the method. Okay. But we are asking the request. From where do we get the request? From the client, right? Or from the user. Who responds to the request? Service method responds to the request. Okay, so we are taking two attributes or parameters in this function: throws servlet exception or IO exception. What is IO exception and servlet exception? What is exception? If anything unnecessary or yes, any runtime error occurs or any unexpected or unnecessary error occurs which may terminate our code directly or which may terminate our program directly. For that, we are writing here throw servlet exception from the exception class to handle that exceptions without disrupting the normal flow of our code, right? Now then, we are providing the method body. What we are saying, print writer pw is our object name equals to response dot get writer. Now we are sending the response to the which method we are trying to write? Service method, right? So what is the use of service method? To provide the response to the user. For that, we need to provide something, some response, right? So for that, this response dot get writer. Now what is the use of this print writer method? So print writer is a class, okay, in Java, which is used to in Java servlet, which is used to send the character text to the client, and it is commonly used to generate and send the HTML content. Okay, HTML content of the response to the client's browser. So why we are writing? Because whenever a servlet processes any request, so it will typically send some kind of response. Okay, so that is why print writer is the tool provided by the servlet API to do this or to send the response from this class, this particular class. So how to invoke this print writer method? Using this line, print writer pw is our object name equals to response dot get writer. Now get writer is the method inside the print writer class. Now pw.println means, so this is the HTML code which we are going to send as a response to the client. So what we are sending as a response to the client? Yeah, HTML content, but by looking at this code, what is the content? What will be the client able to see the entire code or only a single particular line from this? Yes, only hello world will be visible to the client, right? So this is the simple servlet code. Got it? So these are some request interface methods that we can use to retrieve the response. Response.getWriter here is nothing but response.getWriter is a method to respond back. Is a method, right? Is a method from printWriter class. So we are invoking this method. So you can use the servlet request interface associated with HTTP servlet to retrieve this following: session information, remote user information, HTTP meta information, and path information and the query. Now, if we break down the link, HTTP link, so what is this localhost colon 8080? This is server name and port, right? 8080 is port. And localhost is our server. Okay. What is test servlet? It is an virtual servlet making to actual servlet. Then what is extra path info? If any extra path information is required to tell or to see, then that path will be present here. Okay. And what is query string? Yes, some value or request. Yes, request we can say. Now someone asks what is port? What is port? Port is nothing but a communication endpoint. Okay. Which is used to which is used to differentiate between services or applications. That is nothing but a port. So ports helps us to manage multiple network connections on the same device, right? To communicate the network, to communicate over the network simultaneously without any interference. Now these are some request methods. String get parameter. Now this method returns just one of the values associated with the given parameter. And what is the difference between this string and this string? This is the string of array, right? Get parameter values, string parameter name. So this method returns all the values associated with the given parameter. What is the use of this method? This method is returning only one value, string and array. Yes. So while doing a job search, you might have seen a location list box that allows you to select multiple states. In this case, the parameter location may have multiple values, right? Now, what is variable scope? Yes, accessing range. So for page, it is least visible. First of all, we need to see what is session and okay, to not get confused. So what is session management? What is session management? Session management is nothing but to manage the user state and data, right, across multiple requests in a web application. Why do we use it? Yes, because HTTP is stateless. Because web applications often need to maintain the information about the user state such as login time, shopping cart contents or user preferences across multiple pages or visits. So that is why session management is important or is used. Yes, majorly for e-commerce sites. Now what do you mean by stateless here? Means what happens if we are not using session management? What happens here? Each HTTP request is treated as an independent transaction, right? With no, yes, with no memory of previous interactions. Now what happens if we don't have any memory stored for the previous interactions with the application? What happen? It will be difficult to maintain continuous user experience. So let's say, for example, I am using Flipkart. I have logged in, but I haven't stored the my login info. Like it will ask us no to say whether to save the login info or not. But if I'm not saving the login info, so for me as a user, I need to log in the app again and again, right? Which will be more difficult for me to do the same process again and again. So that is why using session management, we can save the particular data for that user. Using cooking, using session cookies, right? Now how session cookies work? Session cookies are, it is nothing but a small piece of code or small piece of data which is stored on the client side. Now in our example, who is our client side? Flipkart, right? And sent whenever the request is requested, it is sent with the every request. The session ID is typically stored in a cookie, which browser automatically sends the user with each request to the server, right? So this is the example to manage the session. HTTP session is the class name. Session is our object name. And what is this request? Request is our variable name. So this is for do post. Code for the do post method of shopping cart servlet. Now what is the use of do post? It means it is more secured, right? So inside it we are providing two parameters, request and response. Variable for request is rec, response is res. So we are invoking the get session method of session class. True means it is retrieving the session. Got it? Now list of items equals to list session dot get attribute list of items. What is this line is doing? It is retrieving the attribute from the session. And inside if statement, what we are saying, if list of items equals to null, then So can anyone explain what is the meaning of this line? Yes, if no item in the list, then set an attribute in the session. Set attribute, you can see here, session dot set attribute, list of items, then list of items will be the name of the attribute and invoking the or setting the attribute in the session. And likewise item code and command. So we are getting the item code and command, and we are saying if item add item dot equals command, then add it into the list of items. Else if remove the item code. Clear? Okay, so likewise we can perform the session management. Using the which class session management is present here? In which class? HTTP session. And to retrieve the session, we will be using get session method from the HTTP session class. Now how to configure a servlet? We need to define servlet as a part of web application in several entries. In the J2EE standard web application deployment descriptor or web.xml file. What is J2EE means? Java Enterprise Edition. So this part we will see in the practical if we get some time in the upcoming session. Okay, so these are the practical based, means how to configure the servlet in our Eclipse. It is basically trying to say. So the first entry under the root servlet element in web.xml defines the name of the servlet and specified the compiled class that executes the servlet. And the servlet element also contains definitions for initializing attributes and security roles for the servlet. And the second entry will be under the servlet mapping element and defines the URL pattern that calls this servlet. Okay. So servlet mapping, how you access a servlet. So this is the servlet name, servlet class, watermelon and class. As mentioned in the previous line, the first entry under the root servlet defines the name of the servlet and specified the compile class that will execute the servlet. And the servlet element also contains definitions for initializing attributes and security roles for the servlet. And second entry under the servlet mapping element defines the URL pattern that calls this servlet. So this is the first servlet. Okay, this is the first entry. In the next slide, this is the first entry. Servlet mapping controls how you access a servlet. So what it is doing, it is the root servlet element in web.xml file, and it is defining the name of the servlet and specified the compiled class that executes the servlet. Now here we can see this is the name of our servlet, which is watermelon, and class for that servlet is myServlet.watermelon. Okay, likewise for remaining examples, garden, myServlet.garden, list, myServlet.list, kiwi, myServlet.kiwi. So these are the names and class descriptions that will execute the servlet. Now this is the second entry in web.xml under the servlet mapping element, defines the URL pattern that calls this servlet. So for watermelon, URL pattern is fruit and summer. For garden, URL pattern is seeds. So likewise, clear? Here we are defining the name and the servlet class, and here we are defining the mapping, servlet mapping. Okay, what is servlet mapping? Defines the URL pattern that will call this servlet. Okay, so this is servlet name and class, this is servlet mapping. Now this is for declarative error handling. So you can declare your or specify your error pages while declaring your server name, servlet name and servlet class by using the error page tag. Okay, so this specifies for this is for exception, this is for error. Okay, specifies error page for SQL exception. So when does SQL exception occurs? When the database is not connected properly, or yes, lot of errors may be there. Okay. Now how to pass parameters to the servlet. So inside servlet tag only we can pass the parameters like this: hello world. In under class name we can write like example.servlet.hello world 2. We can write like greeting, welcome. Okay, so inside servlet we can initialize using parameter name, init parameter or parameter value. So these are the ways to pass parameters to the servlet. So in the init parameter element, you can use parameter name and parameter value. Okay. What is servlet config? A servlet configuration object used by a servlet container to pass information to a servlet during initialization. So these are some methods present in the servlet config interface. Get init parameter, which will return a string containing the value of named initialization parameter or null if the parameter does not exist. What is the use of get init parameter? Get init parameter names will return the names of the servlet initialization parameter as enums of strings objects or an empty enumeration if the servlet has no initialization parameters. What is enum? Enum is nothing but a fixed set of constants, right? Get servlet context method will return a reference to servlet context in which the caller is executing, and get servlet name returns the name of this servlet instance. Servlet context interface. So what is the working of servlet context interface? It will define a set of methods that servlet uses to communicate with its servlet container. There should be only one context per web application or per Java virtual machine. And in the case of web application marked distributed in its deployment descriptor, there will be one context instance for each virtual machine. methods provided are set attribute, get context, and get request dispatcher. Okay. So this thing you can do as a homework. Now what is forward versus include method? So we will quickly see this. So what is forward method? So request is raised from the client. It will go into the servlet container. So at servlet 1, response is generated but did not send back to the user. It sent back to the next servlet, right? In forward, okay? Response is not yet sent back to the user. Whatever the response got at servlet, it has forwarded to the another servlet. Now here the response is generated and sent back to the user, okay? And in include method, the major difference is at servlet 1, response is generated and it will include the next response as well. And here you can see response of servlet 2 is included in servlet 1 response, and then final response is generated and at the end is sent back to the client. So what is the major difference at the forward method? So what happens in forward method? One servlet is used to forward a request from the another servlet, and then request is handled entirely by the forwarded resource, right? Because the original servlet does not provide any output. And hence the client is unaware that the first servlet was forwarded, as the URL browser does not change, okay? And how the include method works? Include method uses the content of another users, another resource or another servlet as well, such as another servlet or static HTML page in the response, and the response will include resources as part of the output from the original servlet. Yes, it uses the content of another servlet, and final response is sent back to the user. So this is another example for forward and redirect. Now in forward, what happens? user asks for resource at 1, server 1 or servlet 1 has forwarded to the servlet 2, and servlet 2 is providing the resource to the user back again. Okay, so in forward, sending the response from one server to the another server. Now in redirect, ask for resource at 1, resource move to second message, ask for resource at 2 and then get resource from the second servlet. So it is redirecting to the next servlet. So what is happening here? Here the servlet is used to instruct the client to make a new request using the different URL, right? This is the use of, yes, redirecting the servlet. Okay, so that's it for today. So what is the major difference between these two? So these methods are commonly used after form submissions or login handling, or when redirecting to external resources is required. Okay. Okay, so that's it for today.